Hi folks, I hope you're all doing all right. I've really enjoyed looking at your food webs and your descriptions of what's going on in them. One thing that keeps coming up, you need to be really careful of. If you've drawn a food web that is really beautiful and you've got lots of lovely art in it, you need to make sure that you've got the arrows pointing in the right direction. Okay. Uh, Lots of you have drawn lines, which is good. Okay, you've linked up the animals that are predators and prey for each other, but you need to make sure that you've got an arrow on that line somewhere. Ideally at the end, but if it goes in the middle, that's fine. And the arrow always points in the direction that the energy is flowing. Okay, you could think of the arrow as being this is eaten by. So if you've got let's say a little fly and a frog, then you would have an arrow pointing from the fly to the frog. So it would be the fly is eaten by the frog. Okay, arrows very, very important in food webs. Right then, on to some new stuff now. We've been learning a lot about different animals. What are they eating? What do they get eaten by? How do we talk about those animals? Are they a predator? Are they a prey? How far up the food web or the food chain are they? Are they a tertiary consumer? So do they eat something that eats something that eats a plant or something like that? Or are they just a producer? Are they producing their own food using sunlight? Now we're going to start looking at ecosystems. So that's why I've got this nice picture up. This is quite pretty. Obviously, it's not a real place, but it shows all different kinds of ecosystems at the same time. One of the things that I want you to do, attached to this show my homework assignment, is the glossary from the back of the book that we work out of. That includes all of the keywords from everything that you'll learn in Year 7. Some of those things we've already done, some of those things we haven't done yet. This particular topic has got lots of words which, in your head, in your non-science part of your head, you might think that they're the same thing. So ecosystem, environment and habitat, in your head you might go, well, those are kind of the same thing. And if you use those out in the real world and you use them interchangeably, you'd be fine. But in this topic, words like ecosystem, environment and habitat have got specific meanings and they mean different things. So as we learn new words, use the glossary attached to this assignment, and you could save it as a file and highlight the words as you learn them, or if you can't save it as a file, you could print it out. If you can't print it out, then go to the back of your exercise book or just on a piece of paper and write down the word and its definition as we learn it. Then at the start of each lesson, for 5 minutes, either close your eyes and pick a random word with your finger, or get someone in your house, brother, sister, parent, whatever, to pick a random word. They might pick the word and say, what does predator mean? And you've got to tell them the definition. Or they could give you the definition and say something like, I don't know, this animal gets eaten by other animals. What is it? And you'd have to go, I think that's prey. And it would just give you practice with these new words. I'm going to do a little bit of talking about some of these words, and I've got some nice pictures for you to look at. Then, as usual, there is a quiz attached. Some of you're only having one go at the quiz. You get 3 goes. So I would encourage you to use those extra goes, especially if you're scoring like less than 70%. Have a think about which questions you weren't too sure about, and then try a different answer. Okay. So anyway, ecosystems. An ecosystem is what we call in science all the plants, all the animals, all the rocks, all the waterfalls, all the rivers, every single thing, whether it's alive and it's a plant or an animal, or whether it's not alive, when it's like the dirt or the rocks or the mountain, all of the things in a particular location. So, for instance, we've got, let's pick one that's really obvious, an ecosystem down here. This looks like a rainforest. So the ecosystem would include these parrots, these trees. It would include the type of soil. Maybe it's a very wet kind of soil, maybe it's very acidic. It would include all the insects, every single thing in that ecosystem. So the ecosystem is every single thing there. In previous lessons, we defined the word population. So if we've got a population, we're talking about a specific organism, so a specific living thing. It might be a particular plant. So in my garden, I've got a population of lavender plants. I've got a population of rosemary plants, and it's just however many of those specific thing there are. All of those organisms, whether they're plants, animals, whether they're insects, whether it's a type of cactus, all of those living things are the community. Okay, so all the living things in an ecosystem make up the community. The different areas, so the type of area is called a habitat. So you could have a rainforest in South America, you could have a rainforest in India, you could have a rainforest in Madagascar or something like that. They would all be the same type of habitat, but they'd be different ecosystems. So the rainforest in South America might have a particular kind of parrot and a particular kind of insect, but the rainforest in Madagascar might not have any parrots. They're both rainforests, they're both the same type of habitat, but there might be a very different community of plants and animals there. Same with, let's say, a desert. Deserts in America have got lots of lizards. Deserts in Africa might have camels. They're both deserts, but they've got a very different community in them. Okay, so the ecosystem is different because it's got different animals, but the habitat is the same. A couple of last things. You could have similar conditions in different ecosystems, and this is what we call the environment. So if we have a look here, this is a rainforest. This is a very wet environment. So as the clue's in the name, there's quite a lot of rain, quite a lot of cloud. You've got lots of trees and vines, things like that in this ecosystem, and this is a very wet environment. This is a marshland, also very wet. Okay, the soil is very wet and sticky, and you sink into it very easily, so it's a very wet environment, but it's a completely different ecosystem. You can't see any trees growing here. This is all mosses and grasses and things like that, and it'll have very different animals, but it's got the same environmental conditions. So if we go back to here, you can have similar environmental conditions in the Arctic. So you've got some penguins, and this here is tundra. So both very cold conditions, but still different environment, still different ecosystems, but they have quite a similar environment. The desert and the prairie here with the buffalo on, they're both quite hot and can be quite dry. So they've got similar environment, but still different ecosystems, completely different animals living on prairie compared to desert, but they can have similar conditions. You could think about this country and the rainforest. The rainforest gets a lot of rain, so does this country, but we don't get many parrots in this country. We don't get many lizards or sloths or things like that. So you can have similar conditions, a similar environment, but still a very different ecosystem. Okay, let's just have a little look. Ecosystems don't need to be massive. It doesn't need to be the whole rainforest or the whole desert. This is an oak tree ecosystem. This is in the textbook if you want to read a little bit more about it. But all of these creatures, all of these plants and insects generally live around this area, and they're all interacting with each other, perhaps in very, very small ways, or perhaps in very, very big ways. So, for instance, earthworms and woodlice, they don't hunt each other, they don't attack each other. They might eat similar kinds of food. So, if the earthworms and the woodlice, let's say the woodlice eat all the food, the earthworm population might suffer a bit because they've eaten all the food. That's because they occupy what's called a similar niche. Niche is spelt N-I-C-H-E. It's one of the few words that come up which you might get stuck with because it looks very different to the way you might read it the first time you see it. You might think it says niche, but it's pronounced niche. So all of these different animals, they might occupy a similar niche to each other. So like the woodlice and the earthworms, they might they might eat similar things. The niche of the earthworm might also be to be eaten by these different birds. The niche of this hawk might be to eat this particular squirrel. So what I want you to do is write a little bit about one of these ecosystems. You can use these as a prompt, as a way to think about them. If you've got a particular ecosystem that you really like, you might have a really active garden, so you could write about the different plants and animals in your garden and how they supply food for each other. So maybe you've got lots of bees, so you could talk about that. You could talk about an ecosystem which is much, much further away from your garden. You could, if you really like forests, or if you really like sharks, you could talk about an underwater or an ocean ecosystem and say, what niche do sharks fill? What do they eat? Do they get eaten by anything? Do they just get eaten by bigger sharks? Once you've done that, that's your main task. Once you've done that, do the quiz that's attached to this Show My Homework assignment, and then if you've got time, this is the extension. It's a little bit of an ecosystem building game. So when you click on these little bubbles here, it'll tell you a little bit about those different creatures. You can pop it down and it will tell you a little bit about this. It might not be coming up with it quite so much because oh, there you go. It tells you about what that thing eats. So I've put down a termite and it eats that kind of tree, and that kind of little bush thing. So I need to make sure that I've got those things available for it to eat. If I try and put something down that hasn't got its type of food there, it says it's not got the food there. You can put down more than one of the same thing, so I've already got that kind of tree. I could put it again and again and again. Then it'll tell you how are those creatures doing that you've put in. If they're healthy, if there's plenty of food, and if there's plenty of food for those creatures, you'll get extra points. You get lots more points for having lots and lots of different creatures there, but you lose points if those creatures are running out of food or if they completely run out of food, in which case they die. So let's say I've got this little termite here. If I put down that one, put down too many of that mouse, they eat all the termites, and then they're not very healthy because they've got no food. The trees are fine.